Have you ever thought that the reason that you're struggling to make your comic isn't because you're not good enough, but because you haven't organized your week properly? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how I was able to produce 3 pages per week of my comic with a full-time job and family responsibility. And I'll show you how I'm going to remake that schedule to account for the fact that I'm starting my comic again. So the first thing that we need to do is establish our week. I'm going to use my own schedule as an example throughout this video, but I encourage you to follow along to either create or improve your current schedule. And this is what my week looked like. I've got the first 2 days working on my thumbnails, then pencils and inks towards the end of the week. Pretty simple, pretty standard. But it really worked for me and I was pumping out 3 pages per week. But that was before I restarted. If you're new here, I recently restarted my comic after spending over 1,000 hours on it, but I've already done a video about that. While I was making that comic, I intentionally left out coloring because I was going to do all of the line work first and then go back to the beginning and do all the colors. I don't intend to do that this time around because in hindsight, that was a bad decision. So I'm going to factor in coloring to this new schedule. And this is how I'm planning it out. So Monday and Tuesday remain thumbnail days. If it feels like I'm spending a lot of time on thumbnails, well, I am, but there's a very good reason for that. And I'm building an entire course around thumbnail creation because it's the single most important aspect of you creating your comic. If you don't get the thumbnails right, everything else becomes harder. You can join the waitlist for that in the description below and you'll be the first to know when it's out. Anyway, that leaves Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. For my schedule, I don't tend to work on my comics on the weekends because that's what I use for YouTube videos or Patreon stuff or Discord stuff or all the other admin stuff around the comic. So for now, I'm going to say that Wednesday is for pencils, Thursday is for inks and Friday is for colors. And that is it. Hopefully you've been able to plot your week in a similar way. Now, normally most of us, myself included, will write a schedule like this and be done with it. We'll think that's all we need and we'll feel really productive. But there are 2 things that we haven't accounted for. The first is that life is going to happen to this schedule. An illness, an emergency, a life event are all things that are going to interfere in some way with this schedule. The second thing is that you might not get everything done that you plan to get done on a given day. Let's take that Wednesday as the example. This schedule, as it's written, assumes that you're going to get all the pencils done on that day. But what if it's a particularly complex page, or you're just having a bad drawing day and you're a lot slower than you normally are? What if you're exhausted and you can't even pick up a pencil to begin with? Writing our schedule down, like hopefully you've done, is a great first step. But we need to put a system in place that protects that schedule and our time working on our comic. So I'm going to do that with mine and hopefully it will give you some ideas to help make your schedule feel invincible. So Monday and Tuesday are still 2 thumbnail days. You're probably thinking that's too much time to be spending on thumbnails, and that's a fair objection to have. It's like 40% of the days that I have available. But what I haven't mentioned is the fact that I'm not just thumbnailing 1 page, I'm thumbnailing 3 pages. And I encourage you to do the same. First, it gives you a better idea of page flow and page turns, because if you just work on 1 page at a time, you can kind of get tunnel vision. And you may find that panel 1 on page 2 doesn't flow with the last panel on the previous page. Whereas if you work on multiple pages at the same time, you can kind of figure that out early on. It can also help you in developing your ideas because you're going from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 and then back to page 1. So by the time you finish figuring out your ideas for page 3, and by the time you get back to page 1, you're approaching it with a fresher perspective. And in fact, that's the main reason why I spread out the thumbnails over 2 days. I want to have 24 hours of space in between the 2 thumbnail sessions so that I can come back on the second day with the freshest possible perspective. And that allows me to come up with alternative ideas or test the ideas that I've already created a lot more easily. Now, because I'm thumbnailing 3 pages a day, and because you should as well, you're actually giving yourself 4 extra days every 2 weeks. It sounds a bit confusing, but this will make sense. So the new week 1 with color added in looks like this. Now there's a clear problem with this schedule because I've only been able to flat the page, but I still need to render it, but I've run out of days. I'm also assuming that everything went well and I didn't skip a day. So let's look at week 2. Because I've thumbnailed those 3 pages, I don't need to thumbnail again in the second week. So that gives me Monday and Tuesday to either catch up on the previous week or to just finish off that current page. So in this case, I'm rendering the page with light and shadow. And then that page is complete. So page 1 has taken me 6 days. But again, because I don't need to thumbnail, I can go straight into Tuesday with the pencils, then go to the inks and then flat and then render with light and shadow. So although on week 1 I got 0 pages done, on week 2 I got 2 pages done. Now let's look at week 3, and let's also assume that in one of those days I didn't work on my comic because life got in the way, or I was just too tired, or whatever the reason is. Monday can now turn into an overrun day, or a day where I just catch up on what I missed. And again, from Tuesday we go from pencils, inks, flat colors to rendering. And then by the time we get to week 4, that goes back to week 1. So it's this cycle of every 3 weeks, I'm creating 3 pages, completed pages per week on average. Does that make sense? I know that these scheduling videos and figuring out schedules can be really confusing. And I think a lot of the reasons why a lot of schedules fail is because just writing a schedule where you assign a single day for a single task and you repeat that is because it's easier, because you just sort of plug it in and then hope for the best. Whereas at least this way, it gives you a little bit of flexibility, which is what you need. So when you're thumbnailing, work on 3 pages at a time. So then it gives you those extra days in the subsequent 2 weeks. And then use those 2 weeks to work on your comic and use them as catch-up days as and when you need them. Now, although I'm only averaging 1 page per week, I would much rather average 1 page of a completed page that is colored and rendered and finished than having 3 pages of line work knowing that I'd have to go back and do the coloring afterwards. So if you're considering doing the same thing, I would consider not doing that, because mentally it made the comic seem a lot bigger than it was. So that's the reason why I'm not doing it this time around. Now, will every single week look like what I've just laid out? Probably not. Life is unpredictable. Some weeks may be a complete write-off, but other weeks I might be able to do 2 pages a week and absolutely smash it. But as an average, this is flexible enough to deal with life, but robust enough to give you that structure and that predictability that can help with projects as long as a comic. It can also help you predict how long the comic is going to take as well. So it gives you an idea of just how big this project's going to be in terms of taking up years of your life, because it is going to be years, unless it's very, very small, of course. Now, my comic is split into 3 books. And so I can say, based on this schedule, that it will take me just over 3 years to complete all 3 books. So averaging about 1 book per year, which I'm pretty happy with, actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, in reality, it will be longer because it's always longer than you imagine it being. But as a guideline, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, for full disclosure, I have not actually stress tested this schedule in terms of working on my comic and using that to work on my comic, because I'm not in the production stage yet. I'm still in pre-production, which you can follow along on my Patreon if you're interested. But from 2026, I'm going to be applying this schedule to my work. Now, will this schedule be perfect? As I've already said, no, probably not, because no schedule is. And I probably will tweak it as I go. But as a foundation, this is a really good and flexible and robust schedule that I recommend you use. I'm certainly going to use it anyway, and I'll let you know if it completely fails, which it shouldn't do. Now, all of that being said, the final thing that we need to consider when it comes to our schedule is what's going to either make or break it. It doesn't matter how flexible or robust or good your schedule is if you don't consider the most important part of your art production, and that is your art style. I'm sorry, I know, but your art style is probably the thing that's going to threaten your schedule and your energy levels more than anything else. And it's difficult because you want your comic to look phenomenal, but you also have to contend with the time it takes plus the limitation of your skill. If you don't have a huge amount of experience as a comic creator, or you're overcommitting an art style, which means that you're cross-hatching every single element, or you're drawing every single blade of grass or wrinkle in clothing, then your schedule isn't really going to help you that much. Certainly not the kind of schedules that I've been talking about. If I decided to adopt a complex art style that required me to over-render every single panel, then that 3 years that it's going to take me to do my 3 books is easily going to double to 6 years. Now, believe me, I understand why you'd want to have a complex or an impressive art style. You want your comic to look the best it can be. But let me ask you this. Isn't it better to have a comic that's finished and in the hands of your audience, even though it may only look about 80% as good as you hoped it would? Rather than having a book that looks 100% how you wanted it to look, but it takes twice as long to make. Because in that same amount of time that it's taken you to produce your 100% perfect version, I've been able to produce 2 comics in that time. Which means that not only have I got better at comics faster than you have, but it's given me more things to sell and grow my audience with. Now, one of the reasons why we want a really complex art style is because we feel that that's going to make the comic better. If it looks visually more impressive, then it's going to be accepted more. That isn't true, but I don't have time to go into that. But it makes sense for you to want to make a comic that looks like your favorite comics. And most people's favorite comics, particularly mainstream ones, usually look visually impressive. But here's a way that you can have your cake and eat it too when it comes to complex or over-rendered art styles. For the comic story art itself, keep that simple. Don't over-render everything. For me, particularly when it comes to the colors, I'm going to do a flat color and a shadow color, and that's probably it. I might introduce one light layer on top of that if the scene requires it, but for the most part, I'm just doing flat color, shadow layer, that's it. The reason why, well, there's two reasons why. One, color is not my strong suit, so it's going to take me a bit longer to do color in comparison to line drawing, which I'm much more comfortable with. And the other reason is because it's for practicality. Like, I could spend like 2 or 3 times as long rendering and doing all the details when it comes to color and trying to emulate my favorite color artists, but that trade-off is not worth it for the comic story. Now, for the comic cover, for the marketing, for illustrations, for prints, for Kickstarter things, all those extra stuff outside of the comic story, that's when you can really try and show off and show the world how good you are as an artist. So that's how you can have your cake and eat it too. For the comic story, keep things simple. Try not to let your ego get in the way and try to ignore your ego when it comes to the comic story. Trust me, a good comic does not need good art I don't want to say good art, that's the wrong thing to say. Over-rendered art, like hyper-realistic or just hyper-detailed art. It doesn't need that at all. Because you can have hyper-detailed art, but it can be a really crappy story, and then therefore it's a crap comic. Whereas you can have like relatively basic art, or even like borderline bad art, but a really interesting story, or a story that's told well, and that's a good comic. So comics do not rely on detailed art. That is the message here. Now, your ego will get in the way. It absolutely will. Mine does all the time, and I'm constantly wrestling with it because egos are loud and they're obnoxious and they're fragile. But just try and push it to one side or just try and quiet it down. Now, I've done life drawing classes with Charlie Adlard, who's the penciler for The Walking Dead, and I can tell you firsthand that that man knows how to draw and paint. Like, he's a very, very good artist. But you wouldn't necessarily know that if you read The Walking Dead, because it's a more comic style, it's more simple, because it needs to be, because otherwise if he over-rendered everything, then it will take too long to get to the inker and then too long to get published. So I'll just pick that name back up I dropped. The point is, use your comic cover art, the marketing art, the prints, illustrations, all that extra stuff to show off your art skills and to satisfy your own ego. Because we all have one, and use your comic story to draw in a way that respects your schedule over a long period of time. That's how to separate those two things, because that's the secret to completing a comic. It's not about gaining skills as quickly as possible or using any tricks or techniques necessarily. It's about creating a robust schedule that supports you. If you've been in this game for a while, especially if you're not doing it full time, which I imagine 99.9% of us are not, you'll know that controlling your time is the highest leverage power move that you can make as a comic creator. If you can control the quality of your time, then you will make a better comic faster. And if you want to know how you can do that, then watch this video next.